Before you were even aware of your purpose, battles were already being fought over your life. From the moment you took your first breath, the enemy recognized that you were set apart. That is why trials came early. That is why suffering found you before you even knew how to fight back. This is not a coincidence, it is the mark of the chosen. Think about the greatest men and women in Scripture. Their journey did not begin with ease, it began with affliction. Before Joseph ruled in Egypt, he was betrayed by his own brothers and thrown into a pit. Before Moses led the Israelites to freedom, he was hidden away as a helpless infant, targeted by a decree of death. Before David sat on the throne, he was rejected, overlooked, and forced to fight battles in obscurity. These patterns are not accidents. The enemy does not waste his energy attacking those who have no purpose. The intensity of your childhood struggles is evidence of the calling on your life. The rejection, the loneliness, the battles, they were not signs of God's absence, but of His preparation. Many who are chosen by God are misunderstood. From a young age, they feel different. They do not fit in with the crowd. They experience deep struggles, yet something inside them always longs for something more. The world may try to break them, but something in them refuses to be destroyed. That is because they are being shaped by the hands of God. If you have ever wondered why your childhood was marked by hardship, understand this: before a vessel can be used by God, it must first be purified. Before a warrior can fight, they must first be trained. Before a leader can lead, they must first be tested. The trials of your youth were not random, they were refining you. The enemy wanted to silence you before you could discover your voice. He wanted to wound you before you could walk in healing. He wanted to destroy you before you could fulfill your purpose. But what he meant for evil, God has turned for good. Every tear, every struggle, every moment of rejection was preparing you for something greater. You may look back and wonder why you had to go through so much, but today God is revealing that He was always in control. The pain was not wasted. The suffering was not pointless. You are not broken. You are being built. You are not abandoned. You are being prepared. This is the pattern of the chosen. They walk through the fire before they walk in their calling. They are crushed before they are lifted. They are shaped in suffering so they can carry the weight of glory. Your life is not ordinary because your calling is not ordinary. Your pain has a purpose. Your past is not your prison. It is your preparation. Stand firm, because the one who called you has never left you, and He is bringing you into the destiny He designed for you from the very beginning. Every chosen vessel of God goes through hardships from childhood. This is not an accident or a mistake, but part of the divine preparation that God allows in the lives of those He calls. From the very beginning, there is a mark on their lives, an unseen battle that surrounds them, because the enemy recognizes something different about them. Even before they can fully understand their identity, the trials begin. The hardships, the struggles, the rejection, and the pain are all part of a process that God uses to mold them into the people He has destined them to become. Throughout history, we see this pattern repeatedly in the lives of those God uses mightily. When God chooses a person, He does not immediately place them in their calling. He first takes them through a process of breaking, refining, and shaping. This process often begins in childhood, forming them long before they are aware of the purpose that rests upon their lives. Many of these chosen ones experience rejection, not only from outsiders, but often from those closest to them. They may feel like outcasts, misunderstood, or different from others. It is as if something inside them does not quite fit with the world around them. Look at the life of Joseph. He was chosen by God to be a ruler and a deliverer, yet his journey began with rejection. His own brothers despised him. They could not understand the favor upon his life, and in their jealousy they betrayed him, throwing him into a pit and selling him into slavery. From the perspective of a young boy, this would have felt like abandonment, confusion, and pain. He did not do anything to deserve such treatment. He only shared the dreams that God placed in his heart. But this early suffering was not the end of his story. It was part of his preparation. Had Joseph not gone through the betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, he would not have been ready for the position God had for him. Moses, too, faced challenges from infancy. Before he could even speak, a death sentence was placed upon his life. Pharaoh ordered the killing of every Hebrew baby boy, but God had a plan. Moses was hidden, placed in a basket, and let down the river. He was separated from his family and raised in an environment that was not his own. Even when he grew older, he wrestled with his identity, struggling between the life he knew in Pharaoh's palace and the call of God upon his people. His journey was filled with uncertainty and difficulty, yet every part of it was shaping him for the purpose ahead. David, the man after God's own heart, was another example of early hardship. Before he became king, before he ever stepped onto the battlefield against Goliath, he faced rejection in his own home. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint a king from the house of Jesse, David was not even considered by his own father. He was left in the fields tending the sheep, overlooked and forgotten, but God had seen him. While others ignored him, God was preparing him. The battles he fought in secret defending the sheep from lions and bears were strengthening him for the greater battles he would one day fight for an entire nation. This pattern is not limited to biblical figures. It is a spiritual principle that applies to every chosen vessel of God. Those whom God calls often endure great opposition from an early age. They may experience loss, pain, or difficulties that seem unfair. Many struggle with loneliness, feeling as though they do not belong. They face trials that others may not understand. Yet in the midst of it all, God is working. He is allowing these trials to shape them, to build resilience, to teach them dependence on Him, and to prepare them for the weight of the calling they will one day step into. The enemy does not attack those who have no purpose. If there is a great call on a person's life, the adversary will attempt to discourage, distract, and destroy them before they even recognize their potential. This is why the battles often start early, but no attack of the enemy can override the plan of God. The hardships are not signs of divine abandonment. They are evidence of divine preparation. Every wound, every disappointment, and every struggle is being used for a greater purpose. When someone is chosen by God, their journey is not easy. They are not like everyone else because they are being set apart. The fire they walk through in their youth is not meant to destroy them, but to refine them. It is in these early battles that they learn to trust God. It is in the trials that they develop character, faith, and endurance. And when the time comes for them to walk fully in their calling, they will look back and realize that every hardship was part of God's perfect plan. Many of God's chosen ones in Scripture faced early hardships, but they also had something else in common: divine purpose shaped by their suffering. The trials they endured in their youth were not random. They were preparing them for the calling ahead. When we look at the lives of those God used mightily, we see a common theme. Before they could step into their destiny, they had to go through seasons of testing, refinement, and preparation. These early challenges shaped their faith, built their character, and deepened their dependence on God. Throughout the Bible, we see how chosen individuals experienced suffering in their youth, but later their lives became testimonies of God's faithfulness. Consider Joseph, whose story is one of the clearest examples of divine purpose being shaped through suffering. As a young boy, he had prophetic dreams of his future leadership. However, instead of stepping immediately into his calling, he was thrown into a pit by his jealous brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused in Egypt, and cast into prison. From a human perspective, it seemed as if everything was working against him. But in reality, God was positioning him. The pit led to Potiphar's house, Potiphar's house led to prison, and prison led to the palace. Every step of his suffering was preparing him for the moment when he would rise to power and save many lives. If Joseph had not endured those trials, he would not have been the man God needed to lead Egypt in a time of famine. Moses is another example of how suffering shaped purpose. From the moment of his birth, he was in danger. Pharaoh's decree to kill all Hebrew baby boys forced his mother to hide him and send him down the river in a basket. He grew up in the palace of Pharaoh, raised in a world that was not truly his own. Later, he fled into the wilderness after killing an Egyptian, spending 40 years in exile. At first glance, it would seem that Moses had lost everything, but in reality, God was preparing him in the desert for the greatest mission of his life, leading Israel out of slavery. Every hardship he faced, from childhood to adulthood, was shaping him into the deliverer that God had called him to be. The same pattern is seen in David's life. As a young boy, he was given the task of tending sheep, a seemingly insignificant job. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint a king, David's own father did not consider him worthy of the honor. Yet during his time as a shepherd, David learned valuable lessons that would later prepare him for his reign as king. He fought off lions and bears, developing the courage and strength that would later help him defeat Goliath. His rejection, his isolation, and even his battles were all part of God's training. Even in the New Testament, we see how suffering shaped purpose. The Apostle Paul, one of the greatest evangelists in history, endured hardship from the beginning. Though he was highly educated and privileged in his early years, his life took a dramatic turn when he encountered Christ. From that moment on, he faced constant persecution, imprisonment, beatings, shipwrecks, and rejection. Yet through all of it, God was shaping him into a vessel that would spread the gospel to the nations. Without his suffering, Paul's ministry would not have carried the same depth, conviction, and power. This pattern is not just limited to biblical figures. Even today, those whom God calls often endure seasons of suffering before stepping into their purpose. Many chosen individuals experience rejection at an early age. They may feel out of place, misunderstood, or even abandoned by those they love. Some face extreme hardships, poverty, sickness, family brokenness, or other painful trials. These experiences are not meaningless. They are preparing them for something greater. One of the reasons suffering shapes purpose is because it teaches dependence on God. When everything is taken away, when people fail, and when the world seems against them, they have no choice but to lean on the one who never fails. It is in these moments of brokenness that God builds unshakable faith. A person who has suffered deeply and has seen God's hand through it all develops a faith that cannot be easily shaken. They learn to trust God, not because life is easy, but because they have seen Him work through the hardest moments. Another reason God allows early suffering is to build character. Trials produce endurance, patience, and humility. Those who have walked through hardship learn compassion for others. They become leaders who can relate to pain and guide others through their struggles. Without suffering, they might become proud or self-sufficient, but through trials, they become dependent on God and sensitive to the needs of those around them. God also uses suffering to refine and prepare His chosen ones for leadership. A person who has never faced challenges cannot handle great responsibility. Just as gold must be refined in fire, those whom God calls must go through the refining fire of trials to be prepared for the weight of their calling. It is through suffering that they develop endurance, wisdom, and strength to carry out their mission. The enemy often tries to use early suffering to break a person, but God uses it to build them. What the enemy intends for destruction, God transforms into a foundation for purpose. No pain is wasted in the hands of God. Every hardship, every moment of rejection, and every tear shed is being used to shape the person into who God has called them to be. This is why many of God's chosen ones go through so much in their youth. It is not a sign of abandonment, it is a sign of preparation. It is the evidence of a higher calling. The struggles they endure are not meant to destroy them, but to equip them. In time, they will see that every moment of pain was a stepping stone, leading them closer to the destiny that God has prepared for them. From an early age, those who are chosen by God often experience intense spiritual opposition. This opposition does not come without reason. It is a deliberate attempt by the enemy to derail them before they can step into their calling. The enemy recognizes the potential that God has placed in them, and he seeks to crush that purpose before it can fully develop. This is why many chosen individuals face hardships that seem unfair, battles that appear relentless, and struggles that they cannot fully explain. These attacks are not random. They are strategically designed to bring discouragement, fear, and doubt, all in an effort to keep them from fulfilling their divine destiny. The enemy's tactics can be seen throughout Scripture. Whenever God's hand is upon someone's life, opposition comes swiftly. When Moses was born, Pharaoh issued a decree to kill all Hebrew baby boys. This was not just an act of human cruelty. It was a spiritual attack designed to stop the deliverer of Israel before he could grow into his role. Moses' very existence was a threat to the enemy's plans, and as a result, his life was in danger from the moment he was born. However, despite the attack, God's protection surrounded him. He was placed in a basket, carried down the river, and brought into Pharaoh's own household, where he would be raised and trained for the very mission the enemy tried to prevent. The same strategy was used against Jesus. When the wise men told King Herod about the birth of the Messiah, Herod, under the influence of evil, ordered the slaughter of all male children under 2 years old. The enemy knew that Jesus had come to destroy his works, and he tried to stop him before he could begin his ministry. But God intervened. Jesus was taken to Egypt, escaping the slaughter, just as Moses had been protected in his infancy. This pattern of early opposition against chosen individuals is a recurring theme, proving that spiritual attacks often begin before a person even understands their calling. This opposition does not always come in obvious ways. For many, it comes through rejection, isolation, or constant struggles that seem unexplainable. Joseph experienced this firsthand when his brothers turned against him. His dreams of leadership were not well received, and instead of supporting him, his own family became his greatest adversaries. They despised him, plotted against him, and ultimately sold him into slavery. The enemy's plan was clear: to destroy Joseph's hope, to break his spirit, and to make him believe that his calling was a lie. But what the enemy meant for evil, God used for good. Joseph's suffering led to his preparation, and his trials positioned him for his destiny. David also encountered early opposition. Before he ever became king, before he was even recognized as someone of importance, he faced attacks that were meant to discourage him. His own family did not acknowledge his potential. When Samuel came to anoint a king, David's father did not even consider him worthy of being called into the house. Later, when David faced Goliath, his own brothers mocked him, questioning his motives and belittling his presence. Even after he won the battle, King Saul, instead of celebrating him, sought to kill him out of jealousy. From the moment God's anointing was upon David's life, opposition followed him. But every attack only served to strengthen him for the throne he would one day sit upon. The same is true for many today. Those who have been chosen by God often face relentless battles, especially in their formative years. These battles are not simply coincidences, they are strategic efforts by the enemy to plant seeds of fear, insecurity, and doubt. The enemy wants them to question their worth, to believe they are forgotten, and to walk away from the calling God has placed on their lives. He uses pain, rejection, betrayal, and even isolation to convince them that they are not chosen but abandoned. Many who are called by God experience a deep sense of loneliness from a young age. They may feel different from those around them, as if they do not belong. This is because they are being set apart for a divine purpose. The enemy tries to use this feeling of isolation to make them believe that they are unloved or unwanted. But in reality, God is drawing them closer to Himself. He is teaching them to rely on Him rather than on the approval of people. Another common attack against those who are chosen is the struggle with fear and discouragement. The enemy often tries to overwhelm them with anxiety about their future. He whispers lies that tell them they are not good enough, that they will fail, and that their past disqualifies them. This is why many chosen individuals face battles with self-doubt, even when others see their potential. The enemy wants to keep them paralyzed, afraid to step into their calling. But God has not given them a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. It is important to recognize that spiritual opposition is not a sign of God's absence, but rather of His presence. The enemy does not attack those who are not a threat to His kingdom. The fact that the battle has been intense is proof that God's hand is upon their life. If they were not called, the enemy would have no reason to fight them so hard. The greater the calling, the greater the opposition. But no attack of the enemy can override the plan of God. Every chosen individual must understand that opposition is part of the process. The enemy will try to wear them down, but God will use every attack for their growth. What seems like a setback is often a setup for something greater. The rejection, the struggles, they are all part of the preparation. Just like Joseph, just like Moses, just like David, they will look back one day and see that the battles they faced were shaping them for the calling they were destined to walk in. The key is to remain steadfast. The enemy may fight hard, but God fights harder. No weapon formed against them will prosper. Every tear, every hardship, every moment of discouragement is being woven into a greater plan. In the end, what the enemy meant for destruction, God will turn into victory. The trials may seem overwhelming, but they are not the end of the story. God is still at work, and His purpose will always prevail. Those whom God has chosen often find themselves walking a path of isolation and separation from an early age. This is not a coincidence, nor is it a punishment. It is part of the divine preparation that comes with a great calling. Many chosen individuals experience seasons where they feel disconnected from those around them, misunderstood by family and friends, or even abandoned by those they expected to stand with them. This loneliness is not meant to destroy them, but to deepen their dependence on God. It is in the wilderness of isolation that they learn to hear God's voice clearly, to rely on His presence above all else, and to be shaped into the vessel He desires them to be. Joseph's story is a clear example of this. As a young boy, he was given dreams of his future greatness. But instead of receiving encouragement, he faced rejection from his own brothers. They despised him, mocked him, and ultimately sold him into slavery. He went from being the favored son in his father's house to a slave in Egypt, separated from his family and everything familiar. Yet, even in his isolation, God was with him. In Potiphar's house, he was alone. In prison, he was forgotten. But every moment of solitude was molding him, teaching him to trust God and preparing him for the palace. The loneliness he endured was not wasted, it was necessary for his destiny. Moses, too, faced isolation long before stepping into his calling. Though he was raised in Pharaoh's palace, he never truly belonged there. He was a Hebrew among Egyptians, caught between two worlds. When he finally identified with his people and tried to defend them, he was rejected by both the Egyptians and the Hebrews. He fled to the wilderness, spending 40 years as a shepherd, far away from the life he once knew. It was during this time of isolation that God encountered him at the burning bush. Had Moses not been separated from Egypt, he would not have been prepared to lead Israel out of slavery. His years in the wilderness were not wasted, they were a season of refining and preparation. David, the man after God's own heart, also experienced seasons of separation. Before he became king, he spent years tending sheep in solitude. While his brothers were seen as warriors, he was left alone in the fields. This time of isolation, however, was where he learned to worship, where he developed his skill with the sling, and where he cultivated his trust in God. Later, when he was anointed as king, his season of isolation did not end. Instead of immediately stepping into his throne, he spent years running from Saul, hiding in caves and being treated as an outcast. Yet every moment of separation was preparing him to rule. The loneliness he experienced taught him to depend on God and trust in his timing. The Apostle Paul also experienced seasons of isolation. After his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, he did not immediately step into ministry. Instead, he spent years in Arabia away from the public eye, receiving revelation from God. This season of separation was necessary for him to be shaped into the apostle who would later write much of the New Testament. Even after he began his ministry, he often found himself imprisoned, cut off from his fellow believers. Yet in those times of solitude, he wrote letters that would impact generations. His greatest revelations came in moments of isolation. For those who are chosen, isolation is not an accident, it is a divine strategy. It is during these seasons that God removes distractions, strips away dependence on others, and draws them closer to himself. Many chosen individuals struggle with the pain of being misunderstood. They long for deep connections, yet find themselves feeling like they do not belong. This is because their identity is not rooted in the world, but in God's purpose for their life. The more they try to fit in, the more they realize they were never meant to. They are being set apart for something greater. This separation is often painful. It can come in the form of rejection, where people they once trusted turn away from them. It can come through circumstances that force them into solitude, such as the loss of friendships, family conflicts, or unexpected transitions. At times it may feel like even God is silent, but it is in these moments that faith is forged. When everything else is stripped away, when no one else is there to rely on, they learn that God is enough. One of the greatest dangers for those who are called is the temptation to avoid this process. Many try to fill the void of loneliness with distractions, rushing into relationships or seeking validation from people instead of embracing the season of separation. But those who try to bypass this process often find themselves unprepared for the weight of their calling. The wilderness is necessary. It is in the hidden place that character is formed, that deep intimacy with God is developed, and that the strength needed for the future is built. Another reason God allows isolation is to protect his chosen ones. Sometimes the people they long to be close to are not meant to walk with them. Certain relationships, environments, and influences could hinder their growth or lead them away from their calling. God in his wisdom removes them from these situations not to punish them, but to preserve them. What feels like rejection is often divine protection. Eventually, the season of isolation comes to an end. Joseph was brought out of prison and into the palace. Moses stepped out of the wilderness and led Israel to freedom. David moved from hiding in caves to sitting on the throne. Paul's letters from prison continue to impact millions. The pattern is clear. Those who endure the pain of separation with faith and perseverance will one day see the purpose behind it all. For every chosen one who has felt alone, misunderstood, or rejected, know that this season is not in vain. The wilderness is not permanent. God is using this time to prepare, strengthen, and equip. The loneliness is not a sign of abandonment, but of preparation. Those who embrace the process will come out refined, ready, and fully prepared to step into all that God has destined for them. Many of those who are chosen by God experience overwhelming trials that seem beyond their ability to bear. These trials are not random. They are designed to strengthen, refine, and prepare them for the greater purpose that awaits. The weight of the calling upon their life often comes with intense seasons of testing. These moments of hardship are not meant to destroy them, but to equip them with the endurance, faith, and resilience needed to fulfill their destiny. The greater the calling, the greater the refining process. Throughout Scripture, those whom God used mightily had to endure suffering before stepping fully into their purpose. These trials were not short-lived. They often lasted for years. The process of preparation was never easy, but it was necessary. Joseph, before becoming a ruler in Egypt, faced betrayal by his brothers, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment. For years it seemed like his dreams were shattered, but every trial was part of God's divine plan. Each difficulty positioned him for his future role. If he had not endured slavery, he would not have learned the discipline needed to govern. If he had not been thrown into prison, he would not have met the man who would later recommend him to Pharaoh. His suffering was not wasted, it was working for his good. Moses too had to endure hardship before becoming the leader of Israel. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, he had access to wealth, power, and influence, yet before he could fulfill his destiny, he had to go through a wilderness experience. After fleeing Egypt, he spent 40 years as a shepherd in Midian. This was not an accident, it was a season of breaking and rebuilding. He had to learn patience, humility, and total dependence on God. The wilderness stripped him of self-reliance and prepared him to be a vessel for God's power. Had he not gone through this refining process, he would not have been ready to stand before Pharaoh and demand the release of God's people. David also faced trials that seemed unbearable. Though anointed as king at a young age, he spent years running for his life. Saul, driven by jealousy, sought to kill him. David lived as a fugitive, hiding in caves, facing betrayal and enduring hardship. It would have been easy for him to question God's promises. He could have doubted his anointing, wondering if the trials were a sign that he had been forgotten. But every battle, every moment of struggle was preparing him for the throne. The years of hardship developed in him the heart of a true leader, a leader who understood suffering, who knew what it was to depend on God, and who could rule with wisdom and humility. Even Jesus himself endured great suffering before stepping into the fullness of his mission. From the moment he began his ministry, he was rejected, ridiculed, and opposed. He faced temptation in the wilderness, betrayal by one of his closest followers, and ultimately the agony of the cross. His suffering was not a sign of failure, but of fulfillment. Through his trials, he demonstrated perfect obedience and endurance. His pain had a purpose, and through it, he accomplished the greatest act of redemption in history. The same pattern is seen in the lives of those God calls today. Many chosen individuals face trials that feel unbearable. They experience deep wounds, betrayals, financial struggles, health challenges, or seasons of great uncertainty. It often feels like one battle after another with no end in sight. These trials are not evidence of abandonment, but of preparation. The enemy wants them to believe that their suffering is meaningless, but in reality, God is using it to shape them. One reason God allows intense trials is to develop unshakable faith. When everything is easy, faith remains shallow. But when a person walks through fire and still chooses to trust God, their faith becomes unbreakable. Trials teach reliance on God in ways that comfort never can. When there is no human solution, when resources run dry, when doors close, the only option left is to lean on God completely. It is in these moments that faith is purified and strengthened. Another reason for these trials is the development of endurance. Those who are called to great things cannot afford to be weak in spirit. They must be able to withstand pressure, opposition, and spiritual warfare. Endurance is built through adversity. Just as a soldier is trained through rigorous discipline, those whom God calls must be strengthened through trials. If they cannot withstand hardship now, they will not be able to carry the weight of their calling later. Trials also serve to remove pride and self-reliance. Many times people trust in their own abilities, resources, or wisdom. But when trials come, they reveal the truth that apart from God, they can do nothing. Suffering humbles a person, bringing them to a place where they recognize their absolute dependence on God. This humility is essential for leadership. Those who have been broken before God can be trusted with great responsibility because they understand that their strength comes from Him alone. Another purpose of trials is to prepare individuals for the struggles of those they will one day help. A person who has never suffered cannot effectively minister to the hurting, but those who have walked through fire and survived can encourage others with genuine compassion. They can say, "I know what it is to be broken, but I also know that God is faithful." Their testimony carries power because it is born out of real experiences. Even though trials are difficult, they are temporary. The suffering will not last forever. Just as Joseph's prison season came to an end, just as David's years of hiding eventually led to his coronation, just as Jesus' crucifixion was followed by resurrection, so too will the trials of God's chosen ones come to a victorious conclusion. Those who endure will see the fulfillment of God's promises. No trial is wasted. Every tear, every hardship, every painful moment is being used by God for a greater purpose. The enemy may try to use suffering to bring destruction, but God transforms it into preparation. Those who remain faithful in the fire will emerge refined, stronger, and ready to walk in the fullness of their calling. The pain of today is the foundation for the victory of tomorrow. Those who trust in God through their trials will see His power revealed in ways they never imagined. Many of those who are chosen by God endure seasons of deep rejection. This rejection does not come without purpose. It is one of the ways God refines, prepares, and strengthens those whom He has called. Rejection is painful, especially when it comes from those closest to us, but it is often a necessary part of the journey. The people God sets apart for great purposes are frequently misunderstood, pushed aside, or even cast out. While this may feel like abandonment, it is actually divine positioning. God allows rejection to remove distractions, to cut off unhealthy attachments, and to bring a person into a place where their dependence is fully on Him. Joseph experienced severe rejection at a young age. His own brothers despised him, not because of anything he had done wrong, but because of the favor that was upon his life. They saw that God had given him dreams, and instead of celebrating his calling, they sought to destroy him. Their jealousy drove them to betray him, throwing him into a pit and selling him into slavery. Joseph went from being his father's beloved son to being treated as if he were worthless. But in reality, their rejection was the very thing that set him on the path to his destiny. Had they not rejected him, he would never have arrived in Egypt, where God would later raise him up to be second in command. David also faced rejection long before he became king. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint a new king, David's own father did not even consider him worthy of being presented. His brothers dismissed him as insignificant, seeing him only as a shepherd boy. Later, when David arrived at the battlefield to bring food to his brothers, they mocked him and questioned his motives. Even after defeating Goliath, instead of being embraced, he became the target of King Saul's jealousy. The very people he served and fought for turned against him. He was forced to flee, living in caves and hiding in the wilderness. Yet despite all the rejection, God's hand remained upon him. Every painful experience was shaping him into the leader he was destined to become. Moses too faced rejection. When he stepped in to defend an Israelite being mistreated by an Egyptian, he expected his fellow Israelites to recognize him as their deliverer. Instead, they turned against him, questioning his authority. As a result, he fled Egypt and spent 40 years in the wilderness, isolated from his people. Even after returning to lead Israel out of slavery, he often faced opposition from those he was called to save. Time and time again, they complained, rebelled, and resisted his leadership. The very people he was sacrificing for rejected him repeatedly. But through it all, God was with him, strengthening him for the mission ahead. Even Jesus himself was rejected. The Son of God came into the world, but the world did not receive him. He was despised, ridiculed, and eventually crucified by the very people he came to save. He was rejected by religious leaders, misunderstood by the crowds, and even abandoned by his own disciples in his darkest hour. He knew the pain of betrayal, the sting of being falsely accused, and the heartbreak of watching those he loved turn away. Yet, his rejection was not the end of the story. Through his suffering, he brought salvation to the world. What seemed like the ultimate rejection was actually the greatest victory. For those who are chosen by God, rejection is often a tool of divine redirection. When people push them away, it forces them to draw closer to God. When doors close, it leads them to the right ones. Many times, the very people they long for approval from are not meant to walk with them. God allows rejection to protect them from relationships, opportunities, and environments that could hinder their calling. What feels like a painful loss is often a necessary separation. Rejection also serves to break dependency on human validation. Many people struggle with the need for acceptance, craving approval from family, friends, or society. But those who are truly called by God must learn that their worth is not found in the opinions of others. If they rely on human approval, they will be easily discouraged when opposition arises. But when they find their identity in God alone, they become unshakable. They realize that rejection from man does not mean rejection from God. In fact, it often means the opposite. God is setting them apart for something greater. Another purpose of rejection is to develop resilience. Those who are called to high places must have thick skin. They will face criticism, opposition, and resistance as they step into their purpose. If they crumble at the first sign of rejection, they will not be able to withstand the pressure that comes with their calling. Every time they are rejected, they have a choice to become bitter or to become stronger. Those who allow rejection to refine them rather than destroy them will emerge with unshakable faith, unmovable confidence, and unwavering trust in God. Rejection also deepens intimacy with God. When earthly relationships fail, it drives a person to seek the presence of God more deeply. Many of the greatest revelations, moments of worship, and encounters with God come during seasons of isolation and rejection. When there is no one else to turn to, they learn that God is enough. They experience His love in ways they never would have if they had remained surrounded by people who only offered surface-level approval. One of the greatest dangers for those who experience rejection is the temptation to become bitter. Many allow rejection to harden their hearts, making them resentful or defensive. But bitterness will only delay the fulfillment of their calling. Instead of resisting rejection, they must learn to embrace it as part of God's process. Every rejection is a step closer to the right place, the right people, and the right season. What is lost is not worth comparing to what God is preparing. Eventually, the pain of rejection gives way to the joy of fulfillment. Joseph's brothers once cast him away, but years later they bowed before him. David, once mocked and chased down, eventually took the throne God had promised him. Moses, once cast out, became the deliverer of an entire nation. Jesus, once crucified, rose in victory. The pattern is clear. Rejection is not the end, but a necessary step toward destiny. For every chosen one who has felt unwanted, overlooked, or cast aside, know this: rejection is often the clearest sign of God's hand upon a life. It is not a curse, but a sign of being set apart. Those who endure it with faith will one day see the purpose behind it. What was meant to break them will only build them. What was meant to wound them will only strengthen them. In the end, they will realize that the rejection of man was only making room for the divine appointment that God had prepared all along.